Alright, grade 11, so we're working through exercise 2 here. It's just based on the new shift. So I just want to clarify, remember this is a horizontal shift that's happening in exercise 2 with some vertical shifts and amplitude shifts, but the main focus is on the left-right shift. So if you have negative 25 within the bracket there, it means it's shifting to the right. For B, we have positive 10, it's shifting to the left. Alright, so for the first question, you have to sketch the function on the given interval. Now, some of you are just obsessed with your table function on your calculator and you're going to plot it, that's fine. But what makes life a bit easier is if you know your original function points. So for cos, negative 90 is 0, 0 degrees is 1, 90 is 0, positive 180 is negative 1. 270 is 0, so it goes 0, 1, 0, negative 1, 0, 1. So it alternates. Alright, so if you know your original, then you just move all of these points 25 degrees over. So instead of negative 90, we have negative 65 because we're going to the right. And so instead of 90 being 0, we have negative 65 being 0. Then the next point's supposed to be at 0 degrees, it's supposed to be at 1. So instead of 0 degrees, which is there, we're going to shift it over to 25 degrees. It's still going to be at 1 though. Then the next one is 90 degrees. So instead of 90 degrees, we're going to shift it over 25 degrees more. So it shifts to 115. Your Y value stays the same for a horizontal shift. Okay, because it's just a left-right shift. Then 180 is supposed to be at negative 1. So it's supposed to be here. So we're going to shift it up 25 degrees to 205. Right. Then your 270 is supposed to be at 0. So you can shift it up. 0 is going to be then at 295. Add 25 to 270. Then 360 is supposed to get to positive 1 again. But instead we're going to shift it up to 385. Okay, so try and not work with your calculator too much. Learn your original, or even pop the original into your calculator, and then just shift it according to the given question, because then you have to worry about the weird steps and all things like that. Because that's a big thing, is you don't know what to put in. Where do you start? Where do you end? What steps must you go in? For the original, then for cos, you just have to go up in 90 degrees, and imagine that you are working with, if it's 25 degree shift and they're making me go from negative 65 to 385, then that must have come from, it shifted, if we undo the shift, negative 90 and 360. The original interval, if you want to say, of the cos graph. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And then they ask you in the second part for the period of the function. Because there's nothing changing yet in front of the angle, then the period of cos graph is still 360 degrees. And then they ask you for the amplitude. There is nothing in front of the cos, so the amplitude is 1. Remember, the amplitude is the number in front of the entire question. And then the range is always your minimum to your maximum value, including them. So y is an element from the minimum is negative 1 to your maximum is 1, always y values. Okay, then for B, B is tan x plus 10 degrees. So it means we're going 10 degrees to the left. It's the opposite way. And they want you to work with negative 100 to 170. So imagine where that came from. Negative 100 must have come, if we go backwards, from negative 90, and 170 must have come from 180. So you just need to know for your tan values where your original numbers were. So if we're looking here, negative 90 and 90 were the original asymptotes. So now the asymptote is going to move 10 degrees to the left. So it becomes negative 100 and then 80 degrees. then 45 degrees, roughly here, was supposed to be at -1. So you're going to shift that to -55 degrees is going to be -1. 0 and 0, you're going to make it 0 is with -10. And then 180 was also supposed to be a 0, so you'll shift it to 170. And 45 was supposed to be at -1, so now it's going to be 35. All right, so know your original, or draw the original graphs for yourself in your study notes, and know the points where they cross. Again, otherwise, you can use your calculator to plot. It just takes a little bit longer. Okay, the period of a tan graph is 180 degrees. It does not have an amplitude, because amplitude implies the top and the bottom of it. It doesn't have an amplitude, and its range is always all elements of real numbers, or you could say y is an element from -infinity to +infinity, round brackets. All right, so for C, there's an amplitude change because there's a number in front of the sign, and there's also a horizontal shift. If we're adding, then we're going to the left. All right, for a sine graph normally sits, so again, if we're working with 60 degrees as our change, and they're saying 150 to 300, it must have come from -90, because we went 60 degrees more to get to -150, and it must have been 360. So think about what your sine graph would look like from those points. Okay, so your original sine graph looks like this. So 0, and then at 90 it's going to be at 1, 180 it's going to be 0, 270 it would be at -1, and then 360 like that. Right, and then at -90 it would be at -1, and then at -180 like that. All right, so in this case we need to move the graph 60 degrees. So instead of being at 90, right, that point is going to be at 30 degrees. Okay, I'll do the amplitude shift in a second. Right, so, or we can, you can plot all of them. So it's going to be, okay, here we go, that's better. Okay, so at -180, your original sine graph's at 0. So now if I were to shift that 60 degrees, I'm going to go to -240. So that's beyond, so I'm not going to use that point at all. That's beyond the domain that they gave me, -150 to 300. But if I change my -90 and I make it move more to the left, it's going to become more negative. -90 minus 60 degrees. So even though it's positive in the question, positive means shifted left, so the actual angle plotting value gets more negative. So that becomes -90 minus 60 is -150. 0 minus 60 is -60. That's going to become 90 minus 60 is 30. 180 minus 60 is 120. 270 becomes 210. And 360 becomes 300. So that's dealing with the horizontal shift of the positive 60 in the bracket. All right, so now to deal with the amplitude change. So the amplitude change means that the entire sine x plus 60 graph is being multiplied by 2. So we're doubling all of the vertical values. So all the y values are being multiplied by 2. So instead of -1, it's going to be -2. Instead of 0, it's still 0. Instead of 1, 1 times 2 is 2. 0 times 2 is 0. -1 times 2 is -2. 0 times 2 is still 0. And so these become your new coordinates for your graph, for your sine graph. And that's what they've done here. So they've plotted it. Over here. Right. So again, you can use your calculator. You don't have to think it all out, but it's just a little bit more mathematical to actually think why it's happening. Okay, and then the period is still 360 degrees. We haven't done the period shift yet. That comes in the next exercise. Then they're asking what your amplitude is. Your amplitude now is 2. So remember, your amplitude is working with where you're going from the middle of your graph upwards. So there's 2 units there, there's 2 units there. Okay, so it's from the middle to the peak or middle to the bottom, middle to max or middle to minimum, and it's always a positive value, so it's 2. And then for 4, your range is always your minimum to your maximum. Your minimum here is -2, and it's always a y value, and your maximum value is 2. Alright, the last two I'm going through are E and F, just with a mixed in vertical shift now. And then the rest, the memo is here for the rest if you want to check it. So for E, it's positive 60, so we are going to the left there, as well as a -2, which means we are going down 2 units. Alright, so again, plot out what your values for the original cos graph would be, and then start shifting it around. Alright, so just for plain cos graph, here are the values. These are your x value, here's your y value. Okay, so the purple 60 degrees affects the x values, it's the horizontal shift. Alright, so -90, if you move it 60 degrees more to the left, it becomes -150. 0 will become -60, 90 will become 30, 180 will become 120, 270 will become 210, and 360 will become 300. Alright, so that's dealing with the horizontal shift. Now the vertical shift means we're going 2 units down. Okay, so 2 units down means 0 is going to become -2. 1 is going to become -1, -2. This one's going to become -3. This one's -2. And then that one is -1. So you just subtract 2 from each of those values. And then those become your new plotting points. Alright, but just be careful here. They did ask for you to go from -150 to 360. We've got -150 only to 300. So to find that 360 now, the easiest thing is just for that random point, you will go with y equals cos, and then in your calculator 360 plus 60 minus 2, and your calculator will tell you that's 3 over 2 or -3 over 2 or -1.5. So that's where they've plotted here. So -150 with -2, -60 with -1, 30 with, we don't need a 0 there. If you want to put it in, you can put 0 plus 60. Just undo that. So we go 60 is, 30 is with -2, that's 30. And then we have 120 with -3, and then we go up to 210 is going to be -2. You can plot that point, and then 300 here, and then the one that I got from our calculator here. Right, so the idea is just to be able to join those points. Period is still 360. Now here's the tricky bit about finding your amplitude. Just remember that if there is nothing in front of the cos, the amplitude is 1. But if you're going to read it off the graph, you go find where the middle line is, and then it's 1 unit up. So from -2 to -1, or -2 down to -3. And then the range is easy. It's just your minimum to your maximum. -3 to -1. Alright, so again, you can use your calculators, but sometimes your calculators don't give you the ideal information that you need. Alright, lastly, we're just looking at the question F. Tan x minus 40 degrees plus 1. So The negative 40 means we are going right 45 degrees, and the positive 1 means we're going up by 1 unit. They want us to go from negative 90 to 225. All right, so again, remember your original graph. All right, so your tan graph, your originals, and again, you can plot it on your calculator if you want to see the original graph and just jot down the details. Excuse me, is negative 90 is your asymptote. And so you are going to shift negative 90, 45 degrees to the right. So that's going to become negative 45. Negative 45 is going to become 0. 0 is going to become 45. 45 is going to become 90. 90 is going to become 135. So they're each shifting a little place over. This is going to become 180. Then you're going to work with 180 is going to become 225. 225 is going to become 270. But we're going to stop here because the domain they gave us is negative 90 to 225. So we just got to go back here. Negative 135 originally will become negative 90. And so then in your original, let's just see tan of, so all you have to do is just say in your calculator, tan of 135, of negative 135 was 1. So now if we shift it up, negative 90 is going to become 1. All right, so that's the horizontal shift. Then the vertical shift means we've got to add 1. So this one's going to become 2. The asymptote doesn't matter. The asymptote you leave. Negative 1 is going to become 0 if we add on to it. 0 is going to become 1. That's going to become 2. Leave the asymptote. This negative 1 plus 1 is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. Right, so you're plotting negative 90 and 2. Your asymptote is going to be at negative 45. 0 with 0. 45 with 1. 90 with 2. Then it's your asymptote, then 180 with 0, 225 then at positive 1. And that's how you plot your graph. And again, use your table if you want in your calculator. Then if you're going to use your calculator, for tan, your steps should be in 45s. Okay, for tan. If you're working with sine or cos, your steps should be in 90s. It just makes life a little bit easier. But you can play around with that. You can make it 15s. But if your calculator says insufficient memory, it just means that it doesn't have enough space to fit in. It doesn't have, your scale's too small. So if you pick 15s or 10s or 20s, that's fine. But insufficient memory means it can't hold that much data. So you have to change your scale to something else. You can start with your domain and end with your domain. It's up to you. Okay, so if you really want to use your calculator table, you can. But I think it's just so much easier to work. Even if you use the table function for the original function, then you'll always start with and end with, let's say you want to go negative 360 to 360, and for tan, always in 45s, and you can have the standard answers coming out. But that's up to you. All right, so G, H, and I are just optional ones. You can do them, as well as I think it was D that we didn't do. Okay, so some reflections as well. But the memo is here. You can work through it.